Welcome to the Mini Book Podcast, African American Books Edition. Today we are looking at a book that is, quite honestly, essential reading if you want to understand the mechanics of history.
Oh, absolutely.
We are talking about We Are Not Yet Equal, Understanding Our Racial Divide by Carol Anderson with Tanya Bolden.
It is such a powerhouse of a book. It challenges all the comforting narratives we tell ourselves about progress.
Right.
And it forces us to look at the friction, the pushback that happens every single time that progress is made.
Before we jump into this, I just want to thank you for listening, and please consider subscribing for future content. We have a lot of ground to cover. Also, just a quick disclaimer, while the voices you're hearing right now are generated by AI, the content, the history, the quotes, all of that comes straight from the book itself.
Exactly. And while we're going to do our best to synthesize these ideas, we really feel that this is a great way to learn about African American history. That said, nothing replaces reading the text yourself. So after hearing this, we would strongly encourage you to go out and purchase We Are Not Yet Equal, support the authors.
Definitely. So let's get into it. The book opens with this premise that it just immediately grabs you. When we turn on the news and see racial conflict, protests in Ferguson or Baltimore or anywhere, the media narrative almost always defaults to this concept of Black rage.
Right. You see images of shouting, frustration, maybe rioting. The camera always focuses on the reaction.
And it frames the narrative around Black anger, implying that this anger is the source of the problem. But Anderson argues that's a complete misdiagnosis. She says we're looking at the smoke and ignoring the fire. Her thesis is that the real driver of American history, this, invisible force, is actually white rage.
And we really need to pause here and define that term, because it's easy to misunderstand. When Anderson says white rage, she isn't necessarily talking about, like, a guy in a white hood burning a cross.
Right, that's not the main focus.
That exists, and that's part of it, but she argues that's the clumsy, loud version.
It's the tip of the iceberg, not the iceberg itself.
Exactly. The white rage she's describing is much more effective because it's quiet, it's bureaucratic.
He wears a suit.
It wears a suit. It sits behind a judge's bench or in a state legislature. It works through the court systems, through zoning laws, through school board decisions. It's a systemic legal backlash.
That is such a crucial distinction. It's not just hatred, it's policy.
It is policy. Policy designed to protect a specific hierarchy. And the book lays out this recurring cycle that happens over and over.
Okay, so what's the cycle?
It goes like this. Step 1. African Americans make a significant step forward. An advancement. Step 2. That advancement triggers a panic in the system. And step 3, the system responds with a wave of white rage designed to roll back those specific gains.
Advancement followed by containment.
Precisely. And to see this pattern clearly, we have to go back to what the book calls the original sin of this cycle. We have to look at the death of Reconstruction.
Right after the Civil War. So let's set the scene. It's 1865, the war is over, slavery is abolished, and for a very brief moment, there is this incredible sense of hope. You have General Sherman issuing Special Field Order number 15.
And this is where the famous promise comes from, 40 acres and a mule. And you have to understand why this was so important. It wasn't just a gift.
Yeah.
It was an acknowledgement that you can't be truly free if you're economically dependent on the people who used to own you.
It was a path to generational wealth, a start.
A real start. The idea was to give land abandoned by Confederates to formerly enslaved families so they could build independent lives.
But then, of course, President Lincoln is assassinated, Andrew Johnson takes over.
And if this story have a villain in Chapter 1, it is absolutely Andrew Johnson. He is the personification of the backlash. He looked at these land grants, and he didn't see justice.
What did he see?
He saw, and this is a quote, discrimination against whites.
He literally viewed equal treatment for Black people as favoritism.
He did. So he pardoned the Confederates, and then, in a move that is just heartbreaking to read about, he ordered the army to evict the Black families from that land and give it back to the very people who had rebelled against the Union.
So you have people who had just started farming, just tasted that independence, and the government shows up and says, get off, this belongs to your old master again.
And that paved the way for the Black Codes. This is where the bureaucratic rage really kicks in.
Okay.
The South realized they couldn't own people anymore, technically, but they still needed the labor.
So how do you force a free person to work for free?
You make it illegal to be free. You criminalize their existence. The Black Codes were laws that made it a crime for a Black man to be unemployed. It was called vagrancy.
So if you couldn't show a piece of paper proving you had a job, usually with a white employer,
You were arrested. And here's the trap. Once you're arrested, you get a fine. You can't pay it, of course. So the court says, no problem, we'll lease you out to a plantation owner to work off your debt.
It was slavery by another name.
It was. And not just the men. The courts could take black children from their parents if they decided the parents couldn't support them. They'd bind them as apprentices to their former owners.
There's a quote in the book that it really stuck with me. It's from a man named Henry Mars writing to the government in 1866. He just asks, if you call this freedom, what do you call slavery?
It cuts right to the bone. And the reason this was all legal, the 13th Amendment itself.
The thing that abolished slavery.
We all learned that it abolished slavery, full stop. But there's a loophole.
Except as a punishment for crime.
Exactly. It says slavery is abolished except as a punishment for a crime. So if you make being black and unemployed a crime, you can legally re-enslave people. That is white rage in action, not a mob, a legislature.
So moving forward, the book takes us to the early 20th century. The situation in the South is, as the book puts it, hell. So black people decide to leave. The Great Migration.
This was a massive demographic shift. Millions of African Americans packed up and headed north Chicago, Detroit, New York, looking for factory jobs.
Now, logically, if the South was so racist, you'd think they would be happy to see them go. You'd expect them to say, good riddance.
You would think. But this brings us back to economics. The Southern economy was a machine that ran on cheap, practically free black labor. When that labor force started buying train tickets, the plantation owners panicked. This was an economic death threat.
So the rage adapts. It shifts from, we hate you, to, you are not allowed to leave. The book details some absolutely outrageous measures to stop people.
A total crackdown on freedom of movement. First, they went after information. There was a black newspaper, the Chicago Defender. It was huge.
It was like the internet of its day for the black community.
It was. And the South treated it like contraband. They banned it. They confiscated it. Police in Mississippi would arrest people just for reading it.
Just for reading a newspaper.
But it went further. Police would literally go to train platforms and arrest black people waiting for the trains. They'd charge them with vagrancy just to keep them from leaving, or just tear up their tickets.
There's one specific story in the book that really just blew my mind. About a man trying to escape.
The man who hid his ticket in the toe of his shoe.
Yes.
Just imagine the tension. He has to walk past the police, trying to look calm, knowing that if they tell him to take off his shoes, it's over. He's back on the plantation.
It creates such a vivid picture. A U.S. citizen in the 20th century having to smuggle themselves out of a state like a refugee.
And again, the pattern holds. Black people tried to advance move for better wages, and the system responded with laws and police power to stop them. That's the rage.
Let's fast forward a few decades. The 1950s, Cold War. And we have the landmark Supreme Court decision, Brown versus Board of Education, 1954.
This is usually taught as the moment everything got fixed. The Supreme Court says segregated schools are unconstitutional. But Anderson argues this triggered one of the most intense periods of white rage in history.
The massive resistance.
But that's literally what the politicians called it. Southern states pledged to defy the Supreme Court, and they were not kidding.
The example of Prince Edward County of Virginia is it's hard to believe it actually happened in America.
It's shocking. Faced with a court order to integrate, Prince Edward County officials decided to do the unthinkable. They closed every single public school in the county.
They just locked the doors.
Locked the doors for 5 years, from 1959 to 1964.
So what happened to the kids?
Well, the white community set up private academies. The state funneled taxpayer money to them through grants. But the black children?
Nothing.
Nothing. Zero public education for half a decade.
Imagine the impact of that. A first grader in 1959 misses their entire elementary education, a whole generation.
And here's where Anderson connects this to the bigger picture. This was during the Cold War. The Soviet Union had just launched Sputnik. The U.S. was terrified we were falling behind.
Right, so the government passed the National Defense Education Act to pump money into schools to train scientists.
Exactly. We needed every brain we could get. But because of this commitment to segregation, the federal government allowed southern states to ignore the mandate to fund black schools.
So they wasted the potential of millions of black students.
Future engineers,
Yeah.
scientists. Because appeasing the rage of segregationists was more important than national security.
It really shows how this white rage actually hurts the entire country. It holds everyone back.
That is a key takeaway. The rage is self-destructive.
Okay, let's move into the post-civil rights era. The late 60s, 70s, 80s. The laws have changed. You can't have whites-only signs anymore. So how does the rage adapt?
It changes its language, goes undercover. This is the era of the Southern strategy. It became, socially unacceptable to use explicit racial slurs. So politicians started using colorblind terms.
Terms like law and order, urban, welfare queens, forced busing.
Exactly, dog whistles. They signal to white voters that the status quo would be protected without explicitly mentioning race. And the most devastating policy to come out of this was the war on drugs.
Specifically, crack cocaine. The book highlights the sentencing discrepancy.
The 100-to-1 disparity. This is crucial for understanding mass incarceration. In the 80s, if you were caught with 5 grams of crack cocaine, which was cheaper, associated with black users, you got a mandatory 5-year sentence.
5 grams. But to get that same 5 years for powder cocaine?
You had to have 500 grams.
Wow.
Think about that math. 5 grams versus 500. Same drug, chemically. But the punishment was designed to target a specific community.
And the consequences went way beyond jail time.
Oh yeah, this is the long game. Because of these felony convictions, millions of black men were stripped of their right to vote. Felony disenfranchisement. So, without technically repealing the Voting Rights Act of 1965,
They neutralized it.
they managed to remove a massive chunk of the black electorate from the voting booth.
It's the pattern again. Advancement, the Voting Rights Act, followed by a backlash that uses criminal law to roll it back.
And that brings us to the modern era, the election of Barack Obama in 2008.
I remember that time so vividly. All this talk about a post-racial America. People really thought, okay, we did it. Racism is over.
It was a moment of incredible hope. But Anderson argues it triggered a massive wave of white rage. The backlash was almost immediate.
And again, not just angry comments online, it was structural.
Right. Look at the Supreme Court case, Shelby County v. Holder in 2013. The court gutted the key enforcement part of the Voting Rights Act. Their logic was essentially, things have changed. The South isn't racist anymore. We don't need this.
And what happened the moment that ruling came down?
It was N hours. Literally hours. States like Texas and North Carolina moved to pass strict voter ID laws. Anderson points out they even requested data on which types of ID black voters were least likely to have, and then excluded those specific IDs.
It's like they were just waiting for the starting gun.
They were. But the most chilling example of this modern backlash that Anderson discusses is the tragedy in Charleston.
The attack by Dylan Roof on the Emmanuel AME Church.
A horrific event. But Anderson asks us to look closely at who Roof targeted. He didn't go to a street corner or a place associated with crime.
He went to a historic black church. He sat a Bible study with.
Exactly. He targeted the most respectable, upstanding pillars of the community. He sat with them for an hour. They welcomed him, and then he killed them. And he told them why. He said, "You are taking over our country."
That quote, it really summarizes the entire book, doesn't it?
It does. It illustrates that the trigger for white rage isn't black crime or bad behavior. It's black excellence, black citizenship, the presence of black people in the halls of power. It's the ambition and the success that is seen as the threat.
It is a heavy realization, but a necessary one if we want to understand the history of this country.
Absolutely. The book argues that we can't fix the racial divide if we refuse to diagnose the problem correctly. If we keep treating the symptoms, the protests, without looking at the disease, the systemic rage against advancement, we'll just stay stuck in this cycle.
So to summarize what we've learned from We Are Not Yet Equal, American history is a continuous cycle. Black people show resilience, they make advancements, and each time that advancement is met with a systemic, legal, and often violent backlash defined as white rage.
And recognizing that pattern is the first step toward breaking it.
We want to leave you with a thought to mull over. If the system reacts this way to advancement, what does that say about how we define American identity, and how can we rewrite that definition to be truly inclusive?
That is the question of our time.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Mini Book Podcast African American Books Edition. If you found this discussion valuable, please hit that subscribe button and tell a friend about us.
And we want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and suggest other books you would like to hear about in future episodes. We love seeing your recommendations.
And finally, please go out and purchase We Are Not Yet Equal by Carol Anderson and Tanya Bolden. Supporting these authors is the best way to keep this vital history alive. Thanks for subscribing and listening. We'll see you next time.